Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's lesson in the role of narrative in games. This week, we're going to be discussing how you can use story and your theme to elevate gameplay and draw players in to your game world, immerse them in the game that you're making by making them care about the story or the characters that they are playing. So our first question is, how does our narrative impact gameplay? Um, from like the larger perspective of it adds immersion, or it gives players choices, or it gives them an emotional connection to the games that they're playing. You can increase their connection to the game and their interest in the game by giving them a good theme, a good story behind what they're doing. A really good example of games that do this are a lot of the Fantasy Flight games style Call of Cthulhu, or their larger um, franchise based board games. They tailor a lot of the game design, the mechanics in the game, as well as the tokens and board and rules, to the theme that they're going for. And when you play a game like Call of Cthulhu, or um, Eldritch Horror, my favorite being Elder Sign. Those types of games, every part of it feels like you're in the world, the Lovecraftian mythos of that those games are going for. So when you talk immersion, we want to make sure that these mechanics and themes are created in a way that makes players feel invested in the world that you're creating. Um, when we talk choices, we want to make sure that these narrative points that we've created um, give players agency to feel like they are affecting the game world while they're playing. And then with emotional connection, we want them to care about those decisions that they've made, want to care about the results of the game that they're playing. A great example of this would be a deep and well thought out campaign in a tabletop role playing game. Whether that role playing game is something more generic fantasy like Dungeons and Dragons, or more focused in something that already has a established theme and game world, to draw those narrative beats from, uh, really hooking players into caring about their decisions that they're making, the characters that they're playing, and the world that they're in, um, will make them want to keep playing over multiple sessions. Um, so how do we tell these stories in our tabletop games, in our paper games or board games? There are a couple of major keys that we want to hit with our story. And first, we want to establish a good world. World building is very important to um, the overall feeling of uh, immersion in your game. So you want to make sure that you've it's not required to be writing out entire codices of uh, story beats from all over the world, and how certain characters got certain places, and all the backstories and everything. You can do that if you're trying to create something that deep, but just leaving through theme, through design, art in your game, getting those flags of like, this is how something would happen in this world. This is how people live in this world. These are the threats that they face. These are the concerns that they have throughout the world, throughout time in the world. Um, and then this is the way that their culture works, or the way that people interact. Next, we work with character development, so we can create the characters that people play, the characters that are involved in the game, whether they're NPCs or they're actual player characters, having those characters have goals, have flaws, and being able to translate those into mechanics, whether it's a character's class giving them additional bonuses during the game because that they're good in magic, say. Look at like the I feel like I'm going to reference Mansions of Madness a lot in, or at least Cthulhu-based things a lot in this lecture. But if you look at a game like Mansions of Madness, each of the characters that you play as have short backstories as to why they're in the storyline, why they're involved with the Cthulhu mythos, whether they're a former cultist of Cthulhu or a student at Miskatonic University, um, or they're a scientist or a mystic, or they're just a beat cop trying to solve a case. These little backstories and these little blurbs written about these characters then translate to mechanics in the game. So your cop is good with guns, and your mystic is good with magic. Your scientist or your students are good at knowledge-based things. Um, that flavors those characters and makes it feel more that they have purpose within the world, and that their actions make sense, that they're able to do things or not do things because they are a person. Anyway, and then you can come up with these stories that you want to tell throughout the game, these narrative arcs, to influence player direction, as well as to create points of decision making. Um, Again, I'm going to keep talking about Mansions of Madness, but the individual story arcs within the Cthulhu mythos get translated to the board through whether it's the companion app telling the narrative every turn of the game, or if it's the original book that tells you the actions that happen in the story that you're playing through during the game. These things drive player action and decision trees to further that plot or resolve the goal that's set forth by the narrative. So now let's talk about adapting established worlds in games. So we're not going to necessarily be worrying about this too much in a class where you're creating your own games. But if you find yourself designing a game based on an already existing property or already existing story, you will be able to pick up on key points through that narrative, whether it's the ways characters act, or the things that they're good at, or the story beats, the challenges that players face throughout the course of the game. Um, you have this the source material to fall back on. So we'll talk about the source material. You can draw the inspiration for these different game mechanics from that. The way that magic works in Harry Potter versus the way that magic works in Dungeons and Dragons. Or the way that I use the Lord of the Rings board game here, which is one of my all-time favorite uh, board games. I played this as a child a lot, actually. But the way that the Lord of the Rings game handles things that you'd expect to see in the Lord of the Rings, such as the One Ring, the way that works, the mechanics behind using the ring, the penalties of using the ring, and the idea that the enemies in the game, the forces of Sauron, the Nazgul, and everything are coming after the ring, and what you have to do to be able to protect it and to get through the boards. From the game encompasses all the way from the Shire to Mordor to Mount Doom um, throughout your gameplay. And this again ties into those themed mechanics. as I mentioned with the mechanic of the One Ring and the Lord of the Rings board game, it has gameplay significance where it can do things like prevent players from taking damage or being found or killed throughout the game. Uh, but as it does in the books, has a very large downside of the corruption mechanic and the um, ability for Sauron as a uh, piece in the game to be able to find you more easily. Also, one of the I think cooler things that you can do with established worlds is you can explore characters in new situations or new perspectives on situations that these characters have interacted with before. So, an example would be I'll keep using the Lord of the Rings board game. An example would be how Sam and Frodo got past Shelob in uh, Shelob's lair at the beginning of entering Mordor, or the way that they defeated the Balrog in Mount Doom. Um, if you know the source material, you know how those characters did perform those um, objectives. However, if you don't uh, want to do that, you have the ability to interact with it in a different way. Um, so it gives a lot of very interesting kind of perspectives on ways characters that you could assume that you know how they would act or how they would successfully complete a challenge. You can try different ways, and that gives a bit of depth to of the gameplay inside of these established worlds. All right, so next up, let's talk about what we can do to kind of enhance our player experience through story beats, through subverting player expectations. Um, a lot of times we can draw off of established tropes and story archetypes to help create that cohesive world. And then we can take those tropes and we can turn them on their head, create unexpected twists in your game mechanics that can change the way the narrative flows. Whether it be something like in Betrayal at House on the Hill, where halfway through the game things are completely flipped on their head, and instead of it being a full cooperative game, now it's one or more players against everyone else, um, depending on the way that the story shakes out. Um, and this can lead to more emotional impact, more surprise, and investment in those plot twists or those subversions of the story within the game. Another good example of this is the game Kill Dr. Lucky. If you've never played this game, it starts out as a bunch of players uh, kind of working against each other to explore this house, and then halfway through the game, um, you find out uh, the exact opposite is true, and you're playing everyone together against the board against the opponent, who is Doctor Lucky. Um, so that kind of gives this like everyone's playing for themselves and playing, you know, for their own objectives, and then halfway through the story, it's or through the game, it's surprise, we're supposed to be working together. Um, Similar to Betrayal, kind of a flip on each end. And speaking of cooperative games, the addition of story elements to these games gives players reasons to work together, gives players invested interest in uh, solving puzzles and completing challenges together. Um, this can create interesting political mechanics with negotiation and deal making and things, as well as more advanced strategic play and decision making. Because how does this decision that we are making as a group affect everybody in the group? How does it affect the game world and um, the state of the game that's being uh, played at that point? Um, and the last thing that we can do, the very very good thing that we can do with using our uh, narrative and storytelling in a game, is to use that as a way to teach and engage players. Um, Using stories to teach things to people has been a very common uh, use of storytelling in throughout history. Fairy tales and fables and things teach lessons to children or to adults. Your folk tales and things like that can um, get people to react or learn things in a certain way, or learn to do things in a certain way that is advantageous for society in general or for a group, kind of in a micro scale. So we can do the same thing in games, where the mechanics in a game, the lessons trying to be taught, whether it's something based in math or based in vocabulary, or more advanced things such as political science or chemistry, biology, any of these subjects that are things that we can teach through gameplay, can be taught through the narrative as well. So in a very loose sense, a game like Pandemic is teaching people about how contagions can spread throughout throughout different areas in the world, um, and the reasons for that, such as you know people traveling from location to location, passing on those contagions. Similarly, I guess, to how a real pandemic would work. As I'm sure we're all aware of, this is something that can be used to teach people to be more conscious about the way that diseases spread. Similarly, the game Evolution can be used to teach kind of the way that evolution and natural selection work, and how animals can adapt to their circumstances to increase their survivability by evolving, different body parts or different ways that they interact with the world. Evolution kind of shows that in cardboard game form. Additionally, you can use narrative to challenge players' assumptions, promote critical thinking, promote uh, in a moral or political sense, kind of that additional thought process of like, well, if we're playing a game such as Twilight Imperium, where it's very politically charged, how do we um, how do we translate that to the way that people think about politics or think about geopolitical aspects outside of the game? So these are ways that you can kind of show that through gameplay, and then get people to think about that when they're outside of the gameplay experience. And then also it can foster cooperation, as I mentioned before in the cooperative games slide. You can um, create instances where players have to work together, where they can learn uh, teamwork and social skills, and negotiation, bargaining, things like that, that can help advance their social abilities outside of gameplay. This is something that you would probably focus more on for younger audiences, or for that kind of younger adult audience, something that can be understood by the audience that you're looking for, that you're trying to appeal to, and also that would be susceptible to the lesson that you're trying to teach. And the last thing in last slide here is a couple of additional pieces of reading that I recommend that you take a look at. These links will be in the PDF form, and I'll also attach them as separate um, part or separate items in the module for this week. The first one is an interview between, or I guess a discussion between two board game designers and how they use storytelling, how they use their board games to tell stories uh, using gameplay and mechanics. And then the other one is another game designer explaining how they approach storytelling in their board game design. So I take a look at both of those for more ideas on kind of ways that you can broaden your storytelling uh, ability inside of your game design. Thanks everybody, and I will see you guys next week with another lesson. Bye.